Second one was being actively unlearning. You know, our schools tend to, and I hate this coming from the heart of an educator here, we tend to teach people what to think instead of how to think, you know.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. The critical thinking skills that are so important for military families. So teach them or look at how they unlearn something. And they used an example of a young man who took his bicycle and he engineered it to where instead, when he told it to turn right, it actually turned left. And he had to teach himself to ride it with it doing the opposite of what he was instructing it to do.
Right.
And it took 8 months to unlearn the normal way to ride a bicycle.
Okay, and to learn the
with the opposite happening. And so
that's interesting.
That's really clever.
Yeah.
So number one is can someone think in terms of what if and simulate?
Right.
Can they unlearn a lot of the things that we've learned that are changing so quickly that we need to begin to go back to the beginning, go back to the beginner's mindset. We don't tend to take time to do that.
No.
You know, so to kind of clear our mind and start thinking, okay, what if I started from the beginning of this? How can I see it differently? How can I problem solve differently? So that was number 2 for measuring adaptability.
Okay.
And number 3 was exploration, having this sense of curiosity.
Okay.
And exploring ideas. And they gave this incredible example of, they said Reed Hastings, who is the CEO of Netflix, in the year 2000, went into the CEO of Blockbuster and offered to manage their Blockbuster video industry that they were doing really well in the year 2000.
Right.
And so the CEO of Blockbuster said, no, I have all these stores, I have all these customers, everything's going great. I just need to focus
I'm good.
on the bottom line. Yeah, the bottom line. And so Reed Hastings went off and started Netflix. And 10 years later, Blockbuster filed bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So that was a great example of not thinking in terms of exploring what next.
Right.
Or what if, you know?
Yeah.
You know, or of going back to the beginner's mindset. It was getting very comfortable with where you are and what you've done and sort of puffing up and thinking, you know, I've made it.
Right.
You know, we need to be adaptable and resilient. We need to start thinking in terms of what if, unlearning or having that beginner's mindset, and then exploring all sorts of different options, ideas, opportunities, not being afraid. You know, failure is our friend, looking at failure as our friend and just assessing, okay, how could I do it better next time? What did I learn?
Right.
I just thought that was great. Adaptability quotient.
That's really interesting. I'm definitely gonna have to look into that. So some of the when you talked about like looking ahead, one of the modules that one of the skill sets that we teach is values-based goals, and it's probably my favorite lesson to teach. And again, it's kind of what I talk about with spouses as well, is, you know, you've got to come up with, well, what's the thing that I want to do, you know? And often I think we pick a goal and it just seems so daunting, you know, whatever that goal is. And so we talk a lot about, you know, making sure that you break it up into those sub goals, you know, and think about, you know, what can you do in the next 24 hours, you know, and you're like, okay, well, there's this big goal. I don't know, what can I do in the next 24 hours, you know? And when I talk with, you know, service members, I'm like, okay, you know, if you're like, for me, my biggest goal was school, you know? So I was like, okay, so if it was me in the next 24 hours, maybe I'll research a school. Maybe I'll try to figure out what it is I want to major in, you know, do some research. So I talk a lot about that with spouses as well, because I think we forget and to teach them that, hey, you know, this is also like, you've got to set that goal, but be flexible so that when those bumps in the road hit and it's not going exactly the way you planned, reassess the goal, see where you're at, and see what you want to do. And I think it's really important too, every new place you go to, maybe look at, even though you need some new goals now, based on the location, based on just growth that you've had already, and set, kind of, you said, challenge yourself and see, what can you do that's maybe new that you're afraid of, that you haven't tried before, but you know what, it's a new location, it's a new place, I'm going to go ahead and try something new. And I think that can help really with that, feeling of loneliness, and building that support and that community, whatever that, whether it's community outside the base, community in the base. I think all of those are important when you get to a new location.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Did you enjoy living in Italy?
Oh my gosh, yes.
I
I loved it.
It's my favorite. It's my favorite, I think, of all countries other than the US. I love Italy.
Yeah, it's a challenge. And when I talk to especially military spouses, I tell I absolutely loved it. I was super lucky. I worked Airman and Family Readiness, which is your Army Community Services.
Yeah.
And I was lucky enough, within a few months of being there, I was able to get into a position and was able to get right back into, my civilian employment, and it worked amazing for me. But for a lot of spouses, like I said, because they can't work there, it's all about that mindset, right? And so I try to, when I was there, as soon as people came in, I'm like, look, like, let's set some expectation management. Often, I think is the killer of certain there, especially, but in a lot of places, of just when you know what you're going into, you can kind of shift your mindset and go, okay, well, if I know I'm not going to be able to work, what else can I do? And a lot of people, volunteered. We had an amazing volunteer program there. We had an amazing spouses program, key spouse program, because people decided, okay, well, I can't do this thing that I was working on, or that I, whatever it might have been. So now I'm going to bloom where I'm planted, and this is the thing that I'm going to take on. And I found it to be, we were closer as spouses overseas, and service members even. I think it's just a whole different atmosphere because of that. But I think that expectation management, like I said, was probably the biggest thing that was lacking for some of the spouses coming in. And especially Italian life is very easygoing, like you want to go to the store on a Sunday at 12, well, they're closed from 12 to 3. So sorry, they're taking their naps. Like, so, so it's way different for sure. Just changing your, realizing that that's the culture, and I'm going to adapt. And you know what? I'm also going to go and sit and have wine from 12 to 3. That's what's going to happen now. That's my new life.
And Italian wine's the best.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But being open to, like we said, change, that's part of that adaptability quotient.
Yeah.
And being open to the fact that just because it's different doesn't make it wrong. I mean, there
Right.
are multiple ways to reach the same end.
Absolutely.
And so that's when we can really learn and grow within ourselves, is when we do become open and flexible and just expand, because we're not trying to sit in judgment of, well, they do it differently, or they think differently, or they have a different worldview than I do. My goodness, expand your worldview.
Mm-hmm.
So,
yeah, it's an amazing opportunity. I think not only going overseas, but just in our military community as a whole, you get to meet people from so many different places within the U.S., outside the U.S., and it's an amazing opportunity to just, like you said, see some of those different cultures, see how people think, and just how different it is. Even with it, I'm originally from Brazil, so I'm always like, well, people from outside the U.S., but even from within the U.S., there's so many different cultures and communities and subcultures that it's really interesting to me, just meeting people from different locations and seeing, oh, that's how you grew up. That's interesting, so.
Yeah. Well, growing up in Texas, we grew up with this mindset of Texas being like the axis of the universe. It was, for a long time, it was the biggest state. And there's this saying of Texas is more than a state; it's a state of mind. So, to marry into the military with no military background or experience or exposure,
Right.
and with that mindset, it was like, whoa. The first time we were posted abroad, it was like, whoa. I mean, I was just taken aback that number
Right.
one, Texas was not the axis of the universe.
There's more
And
than just Texas in the United States. What?
yeah, and that there were many ways of looking at life and love and
Yeah.
foods and work and the whole thing is it we just have to be open, to open our mind, open our heart, to begin to question what if, to think
Yeah.
and simulate and be creative. That's another thing that I felt I lost sight of for many years was my own creativity,
Yeah.
because I felt like I was swimming upstream, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and I was trying to survive, that
Right.
survival mentality, instead of truly thriving within the environment I was in.
Yeah.
And again, our sons look at me and say, "Well, Mom, look at all the things you did." And yes, I did, but I wasn't truly thriving. And that's what I want to convey to young military spouses is, this sense of not only thriving, but embracing the
Mm-hmm.
lifestyle that you have been given the opportunity to enjoy and create. And don't lose
Right.
sight of that creative part of you that gets stifled just trying to wear all those hats and manage all this stuff and never knowing for certain where he's going to be. Is he coming back? You
Right.
know, embrace it and grow in it wherever you go for as long as you're there.
And I think you're right. It's not only creativity, but I think oftentimes you lose yourself
Mm-hmm.
in the process and you don't really know, like, who am I outside of a military spouse, outside of a mom, outside of, all these roles and these hats that you talked about that we kind of put on. We kind of just label ourselves that way. But then you're like, okay, well, what do I actually enjoy doing?
Mm-hmm.
Who am I anymore?
Yeah.
And I think especially you change over time. I found over the years, I've become a little bit, not intentionally, but a little more leery of making friendships because of the fact that, we're still in the military and I know people are going to leave. And
Yeah.
I realized I started doing this and it wasn't an intentional thing, but, and especially when we were overseas, one of the first questions you kind of feeling things out and you're like, oh, so when's your
Yeah.
dearest? When are you leaving? And they'd be like, oh, in like 3 months. And you're like, oh, well, it was nice to meet you. It's like,
Yeah, you withdraw a little bit. Yeah.
yeah.
Because
And so it's hard, I think, to kind of, and it kind of, I think, makes you a different person sometimes, and I know I have to kind of push past that and go, okay, well, even if they're only here, if I invest in this friendship and whatever this is, then they end up leaving, that's okay. It was meant to be for this time. And I have
yeah.
to just go with it, and
Yeah.
be grateful for the time that we had and whatever it is that that maybe I have something to teach them, they're teaching me,
Yeah.
whatever the case is, and kind of be okay with it on, if it is only a short time, being
Yeah.
okay with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Giving yourself permission to love anyway,
Yeah.
and be connected anyway. And even if it is just a brief period of time, there's always something we can learn from each other
Yep.
of
And I think
value.
giving yourself time to grieve too. I think often we I don't know, I
Mm.
feel like we forget that it's every time you move, every time, a friend leaves or,
Yeah.
there is that period of time that you're like, man, you've lost something. It's not, it's a different kind of grief, but
Yeah.
it is, it's
Yeah.
like you said, maybe loss of, man, that was the location I loved. I had finally loved my home, put all of the pictures up, and now we're leaving,
Yeah.
so I think it's important to allow yourself to, to have that grief, but then also, kind of put yourself together and go, okay, now what?
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely. What's next? What's next? And
right.
look forward to next.
Yeah.
What's next?
If I was a brand new spouse, this is like, I've been married a month or so, we're at our new duty location. What would be your biggest piece of advice to me?
is to figure out what makes your heart sing,
Mm-hmm.
and to understand that you can be a great military wife and still follow that pathway.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever that looks like for you, whether it be building a business around it, whether it be getting involved in the community where you are for the time you're there and doing something along those lines, but really asking yourself early on, what makes my heart sing? And how can I grow in that? And in my growth, in my personal growth and development, or professional growth and development, or both,
Mm-hmm.
my whole family will benefit, as will the people who come into my life for whatever length of time they're there. That if I'm doing something that makes my heart sing and adds value to others,
Mm-hmm.
then they're going to be enriched from having met me. And I can give to them something of great value that I can leave behind. That would be my initial advice to them, is to think in that term early on.
Right.
And not wait until you're, decades later and you're turning around, you're looking and you're taking and you're thinking, okay, what are the facets of this that made it really hard for me?
Right.
And, I think it's important to share those, but to encourage them to early on just embrace it.
Yeah.
Find what really brings you joy and go down that path.
Right. I think that's the hard part, I think, for some people is, embracing it. Like you said, I think it's harder for some, especially, like you said, if you come from, tons of family support and community, and then go, oh,
yes,
where did you put me? In the middle of where? There's nothing here. I don't like it, Yeah, we were in Alaska for 3 years, and I'm probably the only person who's like, I hated it there, like the weather was terrible, and I didn't like I definitely didn't like the location. I would not go back, but the people that I met there, I still talk to this day, and I wouldn't trade that experience for anything. And it did force me to grow and to do things. Like, I went snowboarding. I'd never gone snowboarding. I got to, see a moose in my backyard, like all sorts of things that I never in my wildest dreams would have thought would happen. And it's gives you some good stories later on, for sure.
Oh yeah, you had great stories to share. So what would be your number one piece of advice to these young military spouses?
I primarily, like I said, I think it's getting involved, and then really, and like I said, whatever that looks like you said, whatever makes your heart sing, whether it's volunteering, maybe with a church, with whatever it is that kind of is your thing. I think that's the easiest way to start making that community and finding what's good about where you're at, because it's not always fun. It's not always the place you wanted to be. Your dream location. Most of the times, most military bases aren't in the most amazing of areas, except for Italy. So I think it's important to, find what that thing is, and then also realize that there's so many resources out there that are so underutilized, and you've got to start putting those tools in your tool belt, because you may not be going through something right now, but inevitably something's going to come up. Like you said, the what if, when a deployment happens, when a TDY happens, when all of these things, how am I going to handle that? Well, and if I don't have all those resources, most of us didn't grow up, learning all these tools and all these things that were going to help us, but there's so many classes and programs and resources available. And I think really just seeing, hey, what's available? What can I learn about myself? What can I learn about myself and my spouse? Because we're a young, my husband and I got married at 18, like young married couple, what do we know? We learned along the way, but man, it would have made it a whole lot easier if we had just said, you know what, they have communication classes. We should probably go to that. So I think it's important to find those things that will enhance your relationship along the way, because it is difficult to be apart. It's difficult to, to just be in this military life. Totally worth it, and there's amazing things, but you do have to have those tools so that when those things come up, you're like, okay, you know, I've played this what if game. I think I'm prepared, you know, I have the tool to help me. And if not, I know who to reach out to. So
yeah, absolutely. Is you use those resources. And
yeah.
a lot of young military families don't realize how many resources have been brought to bear for the family, which is wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
Because back when we first came in, it was the attitude was sort of like, if we wanted you to have a family, we would have issued you one.
Yeah.
And so, we were not really considered, and there weren't all those resources at our fingertips that we could access and utilize, particularly with technology. So yes, I would definitely encourage them to take all that in and be prepared. Just make everything that you can to build yourself and build your confidence and build your and know where those resources are when you need to reach out and touch them.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, and just be ready to go.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, it's a great time to be alive. The opportunities around the world are just amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And with the military lifestyle, you have exposure to things that you would not have any other way.
Yeah.
I've talked to a lot of spouses along the way whose coming in experience, like you touched on, was so different than mine. They didn't have that nuclear family tie like I did. Mm-hmm. Maybe their childhood had been dysfunctional and not very happy. And so for them, the lifestyle and the opportunity for change and move and all that was more exciting to them than I found it, because I just found it excruciatingly painful to leave all these people who had been around all my life and made me feel safe.
Right.
So for them, it was a different experience. But even then, it can be difficult at times. So, just utilize what's out there for you. Inform yourself, talk to people like you, that they have in place to answer questions and give them guidance, and then implement it. You got to take action, because you can have all kinds of info.
Yep.
But if you don't put action behind it, it won't serve you.
Absolutely. That's really important. Yeah. So as we wrap up, I know I'd like if you could tell us your book again, because I think that, I was kind of thinking like, okay, if I was a new spouse and I'm like, what, maybe I'm a bookworm and I really want to read, and kind of, what are some things that might help me? So what's, if you could tell us your book again, and, if you have any other book recommendations.
Yeah. Mine is Loving Your Life, 7 Steps for Military Wives. And I really wrote it I took the wheel of life, which different facets of our life, and where we try to find balance, within our lives, whether it be family, whether it be faith, whether it be work, there's different facets. And so I sort of wrote the book as a fundamental primer for a military wife who has to try and find balance in a challenging environment for balance.
Right.
And just wrote it from experience in these different areas. So I think it could be helpful to young military wives. I'm finishing up an online course that will be like if they sat down and did it nonstop, which it's not designed for, they could finish it in a half a day. But it has the 7 steps. It actually supplements the book.
Okay.
I want them to be able to access this. It has practical exercises with it, just like our military training does.
Yeah.
And
that's awesome.
Journaling activities and things like that to help them to begin to reflect and ask themselves, what if, and begin to think and, creatively, and simulation type activities.
Right.
So that's what I've been working on lately to supplement the book.
Okay. That's amazing.
Steps. Yeah, it's the 7 steps for military wives.
I love it.
People say, well, why did you focus on wives and spouses? We've got a lot of male spouses, and yes, but I can't speak to their experience. I assume that it's very similar.
Right.
But what I have to do along the way, once I get my my online course along with the book and get my Warrior Wives done because it's in my head and heart, and it's like, finish me.
Yeah.
So I have that outlined. When I get those done, then I'm going to try to find a very active, engaged military spouse male who could write from their perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, you may know some with your work that you're doing.
I may. I'll definitely have to. I can think of one. I don't know if he's a writer, but yeah, I've met some amazing male spouses who, like you said, I'm not, a lot of their experiences are probably very similar to, a lot of the things that we experience. And, but definitely they probably have a whole different perspective on something. So it'd be great to get some, there's one that I definitely want to invite for one of our discussion topics one day. I think he'd be a fantastic addition. So
good. Well, I'd probably like to talk to him too, because I do think that it would be really valuable to have the male spouse perspective and bring that into the conversation.
Yeah.
Not only to honor and show respect for the role that they've taken. And when you figure the socialization process in America and around the world of the male role of sort of being a provider and being this and being that, and suddenly they're in the support role, that has a whole different connotation to it.
Right.
So
absolutely.
I'd love to hear from them on that,
Yeah.
and I'm open to, what are those differences and how can we learn from each other?
Yeah, that'll definitely have to be a topic for another day for sure.
Absolutely.
So
yeah.
The only, I would leave people with I've been reading, and I have been slow in reading lately, which I usually am like, I get through a book and I'm like, I get into it and I'm done. But with everything we've had going on, it's a little bit slower. But there's a book called Option B by Sheryl Sandberg. And she is the COO of Facebook. And it's Option B, Facing Adversity, Building Resilience, and Finding Joy. And so she's the creator of the Lean In, she wrote that book and that process, but she wrote this book after the loss of her husband. And some of the things that I found in there are very, there's a lot of similarities to, military spouses in general and anybody, but one of the things she talked about is at one point she was just kind of down in the dumps and just like, man, like it was like a school event that, her husband should have been able to go to, like that's what was supposed to happen, and her friend was like, well, you know what, like option A isn't available, so let's kick the bleep out of option B. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's like military motto right there. It's like, you know what, when option A is not available, you go, okay, and if I'll have to put that to the side. Well, what now? I'm going to go to option B and I'm just going to do it, and so I have found, like I said, a lot of similarities, and it's interesting to see that someone is, like I said, as famous and as, wealthy as she is, same kind of adversities and things that we experience, she does have, I think, obviously more resources at her disposal than some people, but just an amazing story. And I think, like I said, a lot of things that we can relate to as military spouses for sure.
Oh, I've got to read that. I did read Lean In.
Yeah.
And I read that and that was great. And there's one other, because you did ask me, maybe something else that I've read that was of value. And I don't know if you're familiar with Brene Brown's work.
Yes.
Yes, her work is wonderful, and her Daring Greatly.
So that's so funny you mentioned that. I actually was looking up, because I've watched her video. I actually showed it to my daughter the other day on empathy.
Yeah.
And I love the little video. And if, for our listeners out there, if you haven't watched her, look up Brene Brown. And she just does such a great job in her TED Talks and her videos on explaining some of these things. And I had looked at a couple of her books and I was trying to decide, okay, out of all these, and I looked at Daring Greatly and trying to decide which one I might want to read, because they all sound amazing. So I'll have to read that.
Let's start with Daring Greatly, because that's who we are. That's who we are as military spouses, is we must dare greatly.
Right.
We must dare greatly. And so I just think it's a great book for anyone to read, particularly our military spouses.
I love it. Well, I know I've got a new book on my list now, and hopefully I've enjoyed our conversation and our time talking about resilience, and hopefully our listeners enjoy it as well.
I hope
And
so.
yeah, I guess until next time and our next topic. So
All right.
it was
I'll look
awesome
forward to
chatting with you, Dorothy. Thanks for spending this time with me.
you too, Michelle. Thank you.